There have been some big TV show disasters this year, despite people expecting them to become hits. One of the very first projects we saw this year was Mindy Kaling's Velma, ordered by the streaming service Max. The story about the character from the Scooby-Doo franchise was received by the audience with quite mixed feelings. Velma is a beloved character, and the hype was there. Unfortunately, the show didn't reach its potential. The show was highly anticipated in the Scooby-Doo fandom, and it came as no surprise when the show became the most watched animated project on the platform after the release of the first 2 episodes. But the hype didn't last long, and the show is now the 3rd worst rated TV program on IMDb, with only a 1.3 out of 10 rating and 6% at Rotten Tomatoes. Everybody can agree that it's a pretty horrifying review. Unfortunately, the rating is well justified, as the show might be seen as problematic and too far away from the original idea. The audience pointed out that Velma and the rest of the gang were heavily mischaracterized compared to the previous projects. The major part of the franchise is the friendship that the group has. It even resembles a dynamic of the family. They are full of ideas and the need to make the world a safer place. But in Velma, they barely like each other, which makes the story less appealing to the audience. Mixed with the humor, which is not even funny, it was a perfect recipe for failure. Many people considered the show too woke, with too much forced diversity. What's more, people called out the producer of the show, Mindy Kaling, for self-insertion of her identity into Velma. The show's Velma is brown, but she fails to appreciate her own culture, and the whole thing feeds the stereotypes about South Asia. She's also really interested in a white guy while being insensitive to her surroundings. The description might seem to be familiar. Mindy copy-pasted this characterization to the main character, as she did it before in her projects like Never Have I Ever or The Mindy Project. The show's version of Velma is bitter and cruel, all while being insecure and full of self-deprecating remarks. The sad joke about the Me Too movement didn't help the case either, and the scene where Velma pole danced to get the attention of her father was over the line. One of the Twitter users wrote, "Velma is insulting to the fans of Scooby-Doo and a disappointment to potential newcomers. It's overly mean-spirited, disrespectful to its source material. It goes out of its way to make characters unlikable, and it's overly raunchy and woke." Even after the bad reviews, it was announced in June that the show would get another season, but it's doubtful if someone will tune in. Another show on the list comes from Netflix, and it's the controversial Queen Cleopatra. The show that tried to unsuccessfully combine drama and documentary was awarded with the lowest score in the history of the streaming platform. Also, the show earned a 3% audience score on Rotten Tomatoes, which is unbelievably low. The trailer for the show, released by Netflix, was instantly spammed by the comments, to the point they had to turn off the comment section. And there are many reasons for this awful rating. The first and foremost problem was historical inaccuracy, at least according to the audience. The show presented Cleopatra as a black queen, which is based on not very credible evidence, as Cleopatra was supposed to be of Macedonian Greek descent. The executive producer, Jada Pinkett Smith, stood by her decision, as she wanted to have a project that includes a black queen, as it's not something we see very often. The director of the show, Tina Garavi, quickly responded to the backlash and said in the interview, "Why shouldn't Cleopatra be a melanated sister? And why do some people need Cleopatra to be white? Her proximity to whiteness seems to give her value, and for some Egyptians, it seems to really matter." The backlash quickly escalated to the point where a legal complaint was filed, as the show was violating media laws while trying to erase the identity of Egypt and its people. It was a mess, and we're still wondering what prompted Netflix to produce the show in such a way in the first place. Another show that didn't perform as expected was Disney's Secret Invasion. With the growing Marvel Cinematic Universe, the expectations are always high, but these days they're rarely met, as the stories are no longer very interesting, and Secret Invasion was no different. The show explores the MCU world after the blip, where Director Fury fights against the group of Skrulls who relocated to Earth. Even though the show has some interesting names in it, like Samuel L. Jackson, Olivia Colman, and Emilia Clarke, the ratings were terrible for a Marvel project. On Rotten Tomatoes, it got 55% on the critical score and 55% on the audience score, which is a far cry from the MCU standards. There are many reasons the show flopped. One of them was too predictable finale, which resembled a snooze fest. In the finale, there was no element of surprise, as the audience would have seen the trick of Gia in previous episodes. Also, Gia's becoming a superhero was overshadowed by Nick Fury's journey of self-acceptance. What's more, the audience audience wasn't happy with the use of AI amid the SAG-AFTRA strike. The controversial title sequence faced a strong backlash all over social media. As the studio used AI technology to create the opening credits, the marketing of the show also wasn't the best in the game, which resulted in the audience not knowing that Secret Invasion was already streaming. But it can't be said that Marvel didn't try. They sent scrolls to US cities, but their efforts were half-hearted at best, as it was already too late to advertise the show and create the hype, which would bring the interest of the audience. The movies faced intense backlash, as the movies lacked many things that were supposed to be there, and the connection between the two projects might have scared the audience away. Another reason is that the show is slow-paced and it drags for too long, which is unusual for the MCU. The audience was getting bored, and that might have had an impact on the viewership and rating. It looks like the fans of Marvel Cinematic Universe don't want to see projects that differentiate from the traditional approach of the franchise. We're also experiencing a major influx of superheroes. The MCU itself adding too many projects released in one year to the mix, and people are getting tired. Talking about the flops, the biggest flop of this year has to be Max's show, The Idol. The critics were first to call the show the worst thing ever made, or the worst show of 2023 on Rotten Tomatoes. The show got 19% in critical ratings and 41% in audience score, which is a truly awful score. The whole thing was destined to flop from the beginning, and the whole controversy surrounding The Idol is evidence of that. The controversy was exposed by the Rolling Stone in March, and it was everywhere on social media. The previous director, Amy Seimetz, was fired and replaced by Sam Levinson, which was shocking news. What's more, the story was completely scrapped and big reshoots were made, so the story would be more in line with The Weeknd and Levinson's vision. Also, there were reports of toxic behavior happening on the set where people didn't feel safe. No one knew what was happening, which is not something people want to experience, but The Weeknd quickly responded to the Rolling Stones expose with a simple, "Did we upset you?" After the release, however, the audience was not only disappointed, but mainly disgusted. The writing and the acting skills seen in the show were awful. The complaints were mostly about The Weeknd's performance. The Weeknd portrayed Tedros, a disgusting cult leader. After the release, the audience was quick to ridicule the clips from the show that were shared on Twitter. Many had a hard time understanding that the clips were really from the show and not some type of parody, because the scenes shown in the clips were so cringy. What's more, the show was supposed to be a shocking portrayal of the industry, but it was described as nasty and boring instead. Plus, Sam Levinson and The Weeknd's production portrayed women in the show simply as objects and even took digs at the Me Too movement. According to the show, the movement stands in the way of enjoying things and having a good time. The main character, Jocelyn, portrayed by Lily Rose Depp, is often degraded and treated disturbingly. The fans might remember the scene where she had a cloth on her face while Tedros was choking her. The scene was seen as pretty disgusting, but the show continued and gave us more scenes like that. Twitter users were quick to share their opinions. One of them wrote, "First episode of The Idol was so bad. The dialogues are so 2015 overdone Tumblr template. Only entertaining part was watching Jenny dancing because everything else was trash." And many people shared the same sentiment. The only thing that had people watching the show was Blackpink's Jenny, who portrayed a backup dancer and friend of Jocelyn Diane. The evidence is a clip of Jenny dancing shared on YouTube, which had more views than the trailer for The Idol. After the disaster reviews, it came as no surprise that The Idol was cut short, and instead of 6 episodes, we've got only 5. According to Max, 5 episodes were enough to wrap the story. Plus, the show wasn't renewed for another season, for which the audience is really grateful. Which show was the biggest flop of this year? Let us know in the comments.